Hello and welcome to another edition of Endgame Theory for Beginners. Now in the last video we went over king opposition to help you convert some of your endgames to victories. This week we're going over triangulation, a little bit more of an advanced concept, but hopefully with my explanation I'm able to help you understand triangulation a little bit better and be able to recognize it in some of your games. Now triangulation is best described as moving your king in a triangular pattern in order to get your opponent's king in zugzwang, which is basically making them make a move that completely ruins their position. So in our first example here, we have our white king over here on d5, or pawns on c5 and b6. We're looking to promote the queen and win the game. It's white to move here, and there's a lot of ways that you can go ahead and lose this. So the first thing we want to do is come to e5. The king's going to come to c6 here. We're going to drop down to d4, protecting this pawn. After this king comes to b5, we're coming here to prevent the king to c6. He has one place to go, which is to a5 here. We then push up to king to d6. The king drops, and then we're very easily picking up a queen promotion and winning the game from here. So that's like a very basic triangulation puzzle. We're gonna look at a couple grandmaster games, and we're gonna look at how they use triangulation to win their end games. So my first game here, I'm gonna go over the grandmaster game between Kasparov and Albert in 1978, where Kasparov used triangulation to convert the end game to a win. So with Kasparov to move, he uses triangulation by dropping down to f5. In the game, Albert went over here to g1, but I'm using chess.com's engine to show you can do it without just going through what the grandmasters played. So from here, Kasparov went to e5, which from here Albert resigned because he knew that this game was going to end. And the way it would end is the king comes back to f1. Kasparov then pushes to e4. The king comes over here to f2. You then bring the king to f4, putting the king in opposition. After he comes back, you're able to easily pick up this pawn and win the game. So from here, Kasparov just drops back to g4. The king comes back, and then you push the king up, and it is an easy win from there. So in our second grandmaster game here, we're going to be looking at a game between Boris Spassky and Mikhail Tal in 1965, where Spassky used triangulation to convert a strong endgame against Tal. So the game starts off in this position here, where you have this rook pretty much trapped, and the king is trying to get this pawn. So the way that Spassky did this was he moved his king over here to c2. Tal moved his rook over here to e3. Spassky moved his king over here to c3. And in the game, Tal moved his rook back over here to h4, but according to modern engine theory, h4 is now the best move. But after moving king to d3, Tal resigned, knowing that he's either going to lose the rook or the pawn. And you can just kind of show here how that works is after the rook moves back, the king takes the pawn, the rook moves to a8, and what you want to do from here is you just kind of convert this endgame. It's a very complex endgame. You move the king over here to d3. After this rook comes here, you move the king over here so that you can protect the rook. And after the rook puts you in check, you stop the rook. And then after moving here, you can then push the pawn. The rook then takes the pawn here, and you play rook 5. You're put in check. Put in check. King comes over here to d3, and you just slowly walk this pawn up. So it's a pretty tough endgame to convert, but they ended up not playing it because Tal resigned. Because at the grandmaster level, they can easily convert these endgames. Now in our last grandmaster game, we're gonna be looking at a game between Shirab and Grishak in the year 2000. And this kind of shows that triangulation can happen even from a distance. Now in this position here, white is to move. You got two advanced pawns, but you have two pawns here that are gonna be real hard to stop with the king. And so what white's king wants to do is it wants to be able to get up here and support this pawn here, but you're not able to do that because if you push up, like you get really hasty, say you push up to f3, what happens is the pawn comes up here and you're not able to stop, and this becomes a draw. You're not able to stop anything because one pass pawn, game over. So what he did in this position instead is he went over to h2. After the king came back, they went to g3. He went back to his position, and then he went to g2. And so he brought his king back, but now that his king's on a completely different square, it works that he's able to get his king here in time. So after moving to f3, he went back to e8. He then went to king e4, and then black starts moving its pawns up, but then it's too late because what happens is after going to e5, the king comes over here. You're able to get the king in the back, and you're able to promote this queen. And from here, it's an easy convert to win the endgame. And that's how the grandmasters do it. So I hope that helped in explaining the triangulation. I know it is a very complex topic to teach. I spent a few hours trying to learn it myself and running through how to best use my king to convert these endgames. Now, this takes a lot of practice if you're a beginner. So I recommend looking up a bunch of different triangulation puzzles so that you can better recognize when you're in a triangulating position. But a lot of these triangulating patterns as a beginner, you'll probably find in a lot of long form games because that's where you're going to be able to do a lot of counting and realize that you're not going to be able to move your king in time and lead to a draw. So as a beginner, you might not be able to use triangulation very much, but it's something that you should probably know in the back of your head of something that you can do when you realize that your opposing king only has 2 moves, but you can easily move your king in 3 moves to get to the same position, but completely flip the outcome of the game. So if you like that video, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Drop a comment on any other endgame principles that you want me to go over. And in our next endgame principle, we'll be right here, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.